Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us at day 3 of From Classroom to Boardroom, a virtual event series addressing issues of race and equity in the workplace, both in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in communities across the country. We're very excited for today's session, Embracing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion as an Organizational Culture. It's presented in partnership with United Way of Greater Charlottesville and the University of Virginia Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Kevin Mcdonald, UVA's Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Partnerships. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure. It's really an honor to be here as part of this virtual experience and to be able to moderate today's important discussion. I am joined with this esteemed group of panelists, Debbie Desmond, Vice President for Human Resources and Organizational Development with Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge, Denise Johnson, Supervisor of Equity and Inclusion with Charlottesville City Schools, and Ravi Rispetto, President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Charlottesville. All of them have had their own journey organizationally with the Inclusive Excellence Framework. And we're going to really dive in and talk a little bit about that journey and how others that might be interested can actually get started. But first, let me provide some just background and context on the Inclusive Excellence Framework. I'm excited about, really just heartwarmed by its continued development and adoption across our state and in other places and spaces. And it was really born out of work by the American Association of Colleges and Universities, which really sought to figure out how to move diversity, equity, inclusion from the periphery of being a moral imperative to something that was ultimately woven into the fabric initially of higher ed organizations, and from the standpoint of what gets measured gets done, so weaving it in with a metric driven approach. But what I love about and what our panelists will be able to talk to you all about is really the adaptability of the framework to any organizational type, which is something that evolved from my time in Missouri. But the framework is born out of 5 areas of organizational functioning: their access and success for really whoever you are that you're serving, both internal to your organization and external to it, thinking about the pipelines to your organization and those supportive pillars that help support those experiences more often than not with success. Organizational climate and intergroup relations, thinking about the perceptions of the organizational uh, environment and what are their senses of community or senses of belonging that can be a help or a hindrance to productivity. Uh, Training and education, thinking about building up the important kind of competencies around multicultural competencies, social justice competencies, equity competencies that are important in this work. Your organizational infrastructure. So, thinking about your policies, your processes, the practices, and the people that make them all go, and those, again, that are serving as a help or a hindrance to moving it forward. And last, thinking about it in terms of community partnerships or community engagement. What is the relation to the organization and the community that it's situated in and that surrounds it? And those are kind of then built out with goals, objectives, strategies, and indicators that will build in a level of organizational accountability to move this important work forward. So that is it in a nutshell. That's the foundation. Again, it is adaptable to any organizational type. And it wasn't until I got to Missouri that I took the focus from the organization that I was a part of to really try to meet the community needs that were expressed. My position there was born out of the protests that happened with and were ignited by Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. And the community was reeling. It was a level of trauma and protest that many there hadn't seen in some time. And the community really wanted to grapple with how to move this important work forward and asked for some ideas. And I shared, well, what if we rewrote this framework, removed the higher ed references and allowed it to serve as a backdrop for our community. And it just took off, and it was great to then come to this area and also see the great receptivity here. Initially led in this area by these leaders here on the virtual kind of platform, and then ultimately adopted by our state and our governors. So I'm excited about that, but it also is in organizations across the nation. So with that, I'm going to ask our, again, esteemed guest, panelists to kind of provide a brief overview of how it looks, the framework looks in their own organization. And we'll start with Debbie Desmond.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. I'm going to share some slides here and I'll let Ben get those up. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Debbie Desmond. I work as the Vice President of Human Resources and Organizational Development at Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge.
Westminster Canterbury, the Blue Ridge is a continuous care retirement community located in Charlottesville on Pantops Mountain. And just a little bit about my background, I have been in human resources a long time. I'll leave it at that. And I've worked in manufacturing, publishing, hospital organization, and now in senior living. So Ben, you can go ahead and move the slide forward and I'll share a little bit about our community. First of all, let me just start today by sharing with everyone that we're really in our developmental stage. We're at the very beginning of this process. I'm very excited about the opportunities that we have going forward. But right now, the others will probably be able to share a little bit more with you as their process and framework has continued forward. Just to let you know that we are a community of about 415 residents. Most of our residents are primarily white, and we have 300 associates, and about 51% are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or two or more races, with 49% white. The leadership team in our organization is about 18% Black, and the balance is white. So it's an organization that has really kind of two different types of views. And so it's been very interesting thinking about this process, both from the resident perspective as well as from the associate perspective. So we started in our very beginning piece, we've started by looking at our current state and understanding our data. It's been a great opportunity for us because we're right in the throes of coming up with our new strategic plan. And our new strategic plan will include a lot more information about our residents as well as our associates. So we've looked at the recruitment and employment section, our marketing and advertising collateral, the associate and resident satisfaction scores, and our strategic planning document that we're using. So since this will be our first time developing a metric-driven plan, we'll get to encompass both the support from our residents and our associates in the community. So that is going to be our challenge, and we look forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Debbie. And you highlight incredibly important information, right? Being able to assess where you currently are, your current data, to ultimately start with what will be your foundation to kind of build off of with regards to how you move forward in diversity, equity, inclusion. So as you'll see from our panelists, some are just starting out on that journey, some are a little ways on their journey towards developing their own inclusive excellence plans, and then some have actually completed their plans and are moving on to implementation status. So with that, we will turn it over to Denise. Thank you, Debbie.
Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be with you today. I am Denise Johnson. I'm the Supervisor of Equity and Inclusion for Charlottesville City Schools, as Dr. McDonald mentioned. Will you go to the next slide, please? Charlottesville City Schools is considered a small school system. We are one of the most diverse school systems in the state that's racially, economically, religiously. We have around 800 staff members and just over 4,000 students in our division. Next slide, please. CCS considered itself to have a long-standing commitment to equity, but that began to be challenged when the white supremacist rallies of August 2017 happened. This event occurring in Charlottesville prompted a lot more explicit soul-searching and equity-centered conversations within our community. Then a year later, an article in the New York Times was written. It focused on the educational inequities in Charlottesville City schools and really galvanized attention. The school division decided to harness that urgency as a chance to be better and work harder. From there, we held community forums on equity where community members could talk about their priorities and concerns for the schools and to really listen and really learn. We sifted through that qualitative data looking for our next action steps. We were able to identify really high-level themes which came up consistently. We now call those themes our 4 key focus areas. They are supported and supportive staff, diverse, inclusive, rigorous learning experiences, growing relationships, and equity foundations. All of the work that we do now fall into one of those goal areas. I was brought on board in May of 2019 to help supervise and organize the work. Since then, we have established equity councils at every school, have a division level equity committee, and school board approved equity and anti-racism policies. We are also working to dismantle inequitable practices that were deemed problematic, such as our gifted program and our school resource officer program. Ultimately, we want to build a solid foundation for our equity work. So when we learned about the Inclusive Excellence Framework, we were all in. This framework allowed us to align with the state's vision. We also saw it as an opportunity to use the same language as other partner organizations. And internally, we felt it gave a good infrastructure for the equity work we had already done and wanted to do in the future. We are now in the process of converting and restructuring our 4 key focus areas into the Inclusive Excellence Framework with the help of UVA, Dr. Mcdonald, and our consultant, Dr. Warren Griggs. This is being done by our division level equity subcommittee, which is composed of community members, CCS parents, organizational partners, school-based equity council chairs, and division leadership. Although we have had a lot of conversations and began implementing our equity work, we're excited to have the accountability that the framework affords. We hope to have the process of establishing our Inclusive Excellence Framework finalized by the end of this school year.
Thank you so much, Denise. And as you can see from the narrative that Denise shared, it really speaks to the adaptability of the framework because there was already work in the equity space, and Denise has been able to center equity within the goals and spaces of the framework. So really appreciate that. And last but certainly not least is Ravi Respeto, who has really been the initial partner for me in this area. Just incredibly grateful for her leadership and her support, and has really helped to kind of galvanize additional support moving this forward. So with that, Ravi.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So, I joined the United Way summer of 2018. And I'll give you a little bit of background how we came to the Inclusive Excellence Framework. We had a board of primarily white individuals, and we had a staff of primarily white individuals. And when I got here, there was a lot of discussion around we need to better reflect the communities that we serve. And we didn't really have a starting point, but we knew that that work was important. And it actually started before I joined the United Way. And so one of the things we set to work doing right away was a strategic plan and really looking at how do we create some targets around diversity. So we established a 25% diversity target for our board as a minimum. Certainly a greater diversity was desired, and then 50% for gender diversity. And then we looked at our grant making. We knew that we were giving out about 600,000 in grants at that time, but we wanted to make sure our partners were prioritizing equity as well. And so looking at what kind of data we wanted our partners to be focused on in terms of the communities that they were serving and making sure that their practices were equitable. And then we looked at our hiring practices. We knew that we wanted to have greater diversity. And so, where were we sending out job applications and where were we reaching out and what networks were we working in? And so really establishing kind of a network around that. Thinking about having a nominating committee that also was focusing on diversity, creating a DEI statement, which we had never had before, and also a DEI committee. So a lot of that work was starting to happen, but we didn't have a framework, and that was the thing that was really missing for us. And so when I met Kevin, I think in 2019, actually, when he came to the community and he started talking about the Inclusive Excellence Framework, I knew right away that that was going to be something that would really help us kind of get organized in terms of how we were doing our DEI work and be able to be really intentional. So we've actually taken on all 5 areas of the framework, and we've mapped it to our 3-year strategic plan and our 5-year strategic vision. And so I won't go into all of the areas, but just right off the bat, one of the first things we're focusing on is what we call access and success. And the vision behind that is addressing the root causes of generational poverty and enabling individuals and families to pursue financial stability and achieve their potential. And when we really look at generational poverty in our community, we know that Black families are disproportionately impacted by that. So we're working to really look at how do we change and how do we move the needle for Black families in our community. And when we look at just Albemarle and the city of Charlottesville, we know there's well over 1,000 families that are living at 200% of the federal poverty level. And so a lot of our work is really focused on how do we provide interventions for those families to help them scale economically? How do we work with our partners through our financial resiliency task force to ensure that we're doing the work necessary to make sure that we track the data so we know that we're making a difference, that collectively we're having interventions, whether it be around affordable housing, transportation, childcare, that type of thing. And then the other thing that, again, we're doing all 5 areas, but we're really focused on is the climate intergroup relations. And the vision behind that is changing the United Way's organizational culture around diversity, equity, inclusion internally, and being an advocate here in our community. And so there's lots of things that we're doing around that, but one of them is creating platforms for conversation. So we've launched a podcast called Uncommon Voices, which interviews people in the community with lived experience, talking about what it's meant for them to grow up in this community and some of the challenges that they've experienced. And then also an Envision radio program that's going to talk about race and equity and poverty here in our community on WINA that launches here in the next few weeks. And sort of many other practices, but really creating a communication platform for what's happening here in the community and how can we be comfortable and create conversation and dialogue. And part of that has been our community table series as well. So for example, we just hosted a community table on reparations back in November, and we had city council members come up from North Carolina, Asheville, where they actually had passed a reparations bill to talk about what were the steps that they did to get to that point. And then what in our community could we do to create conversation and dialogue around that? So those are just sort of 2 of the areas that we've focused on. But again, we're really tackling all 5 areas because we know that all 5 are important. And we're doing so much of this work across the organization.
Thank you so much. And as Ravi continues to highlight, as did our other panelists, the adaptability of the framework. One of the things we'll talk about when we kind of get into the questions is where do you start? So United Way chose to start in all 5 areas, but quite honestly, an organization may feel like though they don't have the capacity and may just want to kind of get in where they fit in and might want to start with 1 or 2 of the areas. While we're going through the questions, I'll also put in additional kind of references to the framework. I'll put in a site for the framework's reference throughout the state. I'll put in a site connecting it to UVA, and I've already put in the United Way site, so really appreciative again of their leadership. So why don't we jump into our initial set of questions. And the first question that I have is to kind of describe your organizational journey and what made this the right time to utilize a diversity, equity, inclusion framework at your organization. And talk about, if you would, maybe opportunities or the challenges that presented themselves that maybe opened up the pores of receptivity. And lastly, how does the framework kind of resonate with your current organizational mission? And this one I'll just open up. Anyone or everyone can kind of start.
Well, I'll jump in again and just say that it was really important for us to have a mission and also a vision that identified equity as an important aspect of the work we're doing. So we actually created, as part of our strategic planning process, a vision, which is a strong, equitable community where every person can thrive. And that really became and is the platform for which all of our DEI work is taking place. And I think it's important to just realize it's not just a committee and it's not just a statement, it's really part of the culture of your organization, so that everything that you're doing, and I've listed some examples that United Way is involved in, but in every aspect of the work, DEI is being prioritized.
Great. Anyone else?
And I'll share from Westminster Canterbury. Again, mentioned our strategic plan. We have just jumped into developing a new strategic plan. And in that plan, we've had a consultant that's worked and done market research, as well as conducted feedback sessions with our board, our residents, our associates, our leaders. And in every single one of those feedback sessions and in all the research that was completed, this was an area of opportunity for Westminster Canterbury, and it has been embraced by everyone. So we're in the process of working through our strategic plan, hope to have it completed by May and be able to present it this summer. This is a big portion of it, and it's been enlightening to see the engagement from both
the residents, the board, and the associates as far as being able to put processes in place for this.
Wonderful, wonderful.
We also had our strategic plan as our guiding documentation as well. But I think when we decided to bring equity to the forefront, we decided it was just how we wanted to do business, and that all the work that we put together should have an equity focus. And that took a realigned commitment to that. And so for us, it's not just about having the documentation, and in terms of the inclusive excellence framework as well, it's not just about having that as a plan. It's actually an action plan. It's how we want to put our steps in place to make sure that we have our equitable practices and policies.
Excellent. You know, oftentimes when you want to kind of move a diversity, equity, inclusion work forward, depending on your own organizational journey, where your organization is on its own journey towards inclusion, you can sometimes be met with resistance, right? And so talk to me a little bit about, talk to those in attendance a little bit about how did you develop the collective will to do this, right? The desire is to ultimately make a collective impact. How did you develop the collective will? And then to those that may have encountered resistance, or how did you ultimately create some level of onboarding to get people supportive of moving forward?
Yeah, I'll just jump in again. I think for the United Way, we were really ready. We knew we needed change, and there was a deep desire for change. And so I think that there was just energy around everybody wanting to jump in and do something. I think, again, we needed a roadmap. I mean, that was really the thing that we didn't have. And so the framework allowed for that roadmap, which now, you know, there's so many good things that are coming out of that. We've been able to start an equity audit for the organization. We've been able to bring on an organization called Blue Ocean to do ongoing staff training weekly and with our board. We've been able to create this robust diversity network for hiring practices. So in so many ways, the framework kind of brought to life all of the ways that, you know, we could get kind of the board and the staff really engaged in this work of DEI.
We didn't necessarily encounter much resistance either. Everyone wanted to do good work, and we wanted to make sure that our students achieved. I think for us, and still for us, we have 800 staff members and 4,000 students. And so it takes a lot of work, intentional work, to get everyone on the same page in the same place. We're all coming from different spectrums, different perspectives, different life experiences. And so to be able to organize that in a way that we're all marching towards the same beat is imperative in this work.
Wonderful.
I'll just add too, Kevin, we've also hired a DEI coordinator, and I think bringing somebody onto the staff that is completely focused on this work is really critical. I mean, putting the resources behind it is really an important aspect of the work. And we've also created these equity grants in partnership with your office at UVA. And so it's not just that we're doing the work, we're also working with our partner nonprofits to do the work as well. But having that role, that DEI coordinator, I think makes a huge difference in making sure that the work is, and to Denise's point, is sustainable and really implemented into every aspect of the organization.
So where you have the resources and capacity to do so, having someone focused even more on this in this space can be helpful. That's great.
Yeah, because we realized quickly, like, the work was expanding, and when you're trying to build it into every facet of what you're doing, not having staff or not having those resources kind of can then be that right strategic plan that's kind of sitting on the shelf, but not necessarily really being used on a daily basis.
Yeah, and one thing to note that's important, even in identifying someone that may be thinking about this as a important part of their role and responsibility, it doesn't absolve the others in the organization from recognizing it's still a shared responsibility, right? The work is still a shared responsibility. So that's great. So I want you all to just take a look in the chat, because there are also some great questions in the chat that I'm probably going to incorporate. So Lindsay and Grassfield Farms, R&D, and Patty, thank you for those questions. I'm going to find a way to incorporate them. So I just want to at least give our panelists some time to look at them, because some may resonate with some of them in our work. And I'll come back and ask them as well. Let me ask this next question, though. How has the framework caused you to be organizationally reflective? Right, and kind of in what ways, right? In thinking about your own DEI work and journey, How has the framework kind of caused you to be organizationally reflective in this moment, in time?
Since we're fairly new at this, and I'll just share what our short journey has been, and that is when we had our initial, we can call it a social justice gathering, one thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to find something that we could customize. I mean, we're a senior living community. It's very unique, I guess, a unique organization when you think of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You don't want it just to be for the employees. We wanted to be able to combine our resources. And the other piece that was really important is that this was could not be a diversity program where you check the box. Okay, we've checked the box. We've done all the little pieces of it. We're finished. And now we're going to go on to the next thing. This is something that needs to be sustained. And that's what we appreciated about being allowed to have this framework, because it's going to allow us to be able to put something in place that can be sustained.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I would just follow up with saying that, we can't serve a community where 60 to 70% of the families that come to us for support are Black and not have a staff or a board that reflects that. And I think, the reflection was, we need change, right? But how you do that well is really important. And I think in the chat session, somebody was asking about sensitivities. And so a lot of that goes back to the training piece. Part of bringing on a DEI coordinator for us was we've created a library of books and podcasts and films and even poetry. But doing the work means that we have to do the work, right? So staff is really starting to engage in all of that, understanding implicit bias and how that plays out in relationships, meetings, the real granular stuff. Has been really important, and the same for our board. And I think having this tool that we're bringing on, where it's not one DEI training that we're doing like once a quarter for 30 minutes, like every staff meeting, every Monday, we do a 15 to 20 minute training, and the DEI coordinator is making sure that it's relevant information and also looking and tracking it with what's going on in the culture of our community and then our broader, the United States. So I think that part, that's really important. So the reflection was, we need change, but the key thing is like, how do we do that change well? And how do we make sure it's authentic? And to everybody's point today, like, we're not just checking the box, but we're really actually changing the way as white people, we see ourselves in this conversation and what's our responsibility.
Awesome.
For us, the framework came as a result of our reflection. And so I can't say enough how important it is as organizations that we listen and learn from our stakeholders, from the communities that we serve, and really hear what they're saying as far as our inequities. What are we doing great? What can we work on? What are our areas of improvement? And use that to inform our planning and inform our frameworks.
That's great. And so, Patty, to your question, I know that Ravi started to answer it. It sounds like part of it is being intentional, right, about creating those kind of educational competency building opportunities, and then utilizing examples, right, that will show how to kind of interact with, engage difference, right, leverage that difference, not only to create a stronger sense of community, sense of belonging, but also connecting it to the organizational desired outcomes to actually show that it can also move the organization forward in positive ways. So I thank folk for kind of contributing to that. And all of your work kind of talks about the organizational reflection standpoint of still being intentional. Like, you can't kind of fake it till you make it in the DEI space, right? And so, but you can crawl before you walk, before you run, right? You don't have to ultimately think that you have to accomplish it all in one day, which is taking even the framework itself in digestible bites is totally fine. Right, but in action, I think in this space it isn't, right? So thinking about it and that. Let me jump to Lindsay, since you all kind of talked a little bit about metrics. Lindsay Walsh has asked, can you all share the kinds of metrics you are collecting to measure success, and how often are those evaluated? Who and how many people evaluate that data? Debbie's just starting out. So you talked already and shared the data that you all are looking at right now, but you may not be able to share much more than that. In the higher ed space, for example, we're looking at if one of our goals under Access and Success is to increase the compositional diversity amongst our faculty, staff, and students, we're looking at, particularly around faculty and staff, will be, what do our search processes look like? We may claim, and we're not coming out with the diversity, but what the data is showing us is actually our pools were diverse. They just never made it out of that diversity. So being able to really unpack and look at the data disaggregated to see what story it's telling us. If we're having people that are leaving, why are they leaving? Unpacking exit interviews. If students aren't coming here, why are they not coming here? And are those attached to DEI enhancement that we can make? So that's just a small kind of smattering and sampling of some of the ways we're doing. Even in our curricula, are students able to make a connection between their academic disciplines and being prepared for the global marketplace in ways that show that they have the competencies to work in diverse teams, which research is very clear about. And so those are some of the ways that we are trying to unpack the data. But let me open it up to our panelists to say, are there other ways that you also are unpacking the data, in what ways?
I'll jump in with the United Way again. I think, our 5-year strategic vision is to reduce poverty by 15% in our planning district and lift 1,800 families out of poverty. And within that goal, we're specifically looking at Black head of household families. And so we already know how many Black families we serve each year, but we certainly are scaling that significantly to kind of reflect what we're seeing in the community. And so that data, we haven't started. I mean, we're just at that beginning stages, but our goal is to work with our partners. So through the Financial Resiliency Task Force, which is made up of 10 other nonprofit agencies that are working in this space, they'll be tracking how many Black families they're serving, as well as United Way. And we'll kind of have one database system where we can really look at those numbers both quarterly and then on an annual basis to make sure we're having the impact and that families are in fact scaling with these combined sort of interventions that we're working to provide. So that's one area. And then just on the staff and board, I mean, it's a lot kind of easier to see. We have 50 people, we have a huge board. So we have a 15-member board. If we're hitting that 25% target, we're going to know. And so certainly we have, and actually we're doing much better than that. And the same with the staff. So those are easy to measure. But really the harder stuff is, since we do community-based systems level work, is going to be looking to make sure across the community that we are supporting those families and reaching financial stability.
Great.
For now, all of our data is on our state quality profile. And so all those metrics are being determined on a state level. But for us in our evaluation, it wasn't necessarily those data points. It was, one, how are we using those data points to inform our practices? So it's one thing to just know numbers and know data, but how are you using those numbers to inform and enhance and better the community that you serve? And so that's what we're focusing on now. And also we're looking at making sure that we have data to support everyone's strengths, and that we're looking from an asset-based narrative at this point. And so we want to make sure that we have a holistic and well-rounded metrics to support all the work that we're doing in the school system for student achievement.
Yeah, I love that point, right? It's not data just for data's sake, right? But what are you doing with that data ultimately? Again, looking at the stories is telling us, and Ravi kind of referenced the point of ultimately identifying the baseline and then continuing to look at those measurements to see what needs to be tweaked. Some organizations, the framework itself is kind of viewed as a living document. It continues to evolve. It's not static. And so some have organizations might develop in a future year an impact report. So of the things that you said you were going to do in your plan, what's been the impact of that as a driver? Again, thinking about that as a data point. So a number of different ways to utilize it. And one thing that I should have said at the onset about the framework assumes that the goal of organizations is organizational excellence, right? But that you can't achieve that level of excellence unless you're looking around the corner to see what role diversity, equity, inclusion should play. And in essence, the equation is that you have to bind your diversity, equity, inclusion efforts with your organizational pursuits of excellence to achieve this notion of inclusive excellence. So to Grassfield Farms' point, I think one of the reasons that it's gained a level of receptivity is that that's a level of equation that people can understand. Like, okay, I get what you're saying. We can't really be the great organization we want to be until we're grappling with this. We have to connect it. It's not disassociated from our organizational pursuits. So I appreciate that point. Let me ask this question that I had prepared for you all, and then go back into the chat. What would you tell to those organizations that have a strong desire to develop a strategic diversity, equity, inclusion framework within their organization, but are just not sure how to get started? Right? Sometimes it's just the fear of taking flight that doesn't enable people to just get started with this work. What would you say to them?
I can talk a little bit about that, just because we're doing 5 grants right now to be able to provide the Inclusive Excellence Framework to other nonprofits. And I've gotten some calls actually from some of the directors, and you know, it's a little daunting, right? Because it's really about, where is your organization at in terms of their conversation around equity. And that means taking a look at like the compilation of your board, the compilation of your staff. Like, you kind of have to start there. And then what your mission is, your vision is for the work itself. So I feel like there's a moment, that reflection piece is really critical. And then being able to sort of do this kind of audit, like, where do you think you can have the most impact using the framework? You don't have to start with all 5 areas. That can be overwhelming and a bit daunting. Picking one where you feel that you can have the most success is really the important thing, but making sure as an organization you're ready to do the work. And I think that goes back to being intentional, you know, doing the homework, doing the reading, you know, kind of preparing yourself to be able to take on the work, so you can actually make it something that can be implemented and really build in right to the culture of your organization. But I just want to reiterate that the great thing is that it's, Kevin used to always say this, he's like, you can take the framework and use it in a way that's best for your organization. There's a lot of flexibility there, whether you're small or large. There's an opportunity to do what works for your organization in the best way.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I would just say, reach out to those in your community who have that information, or who have begun the work. And you know, initially we started looking at consultants that were maybe not out or outside of the Charlottesville area, and we found that, you know, we really have our best resources right here. I mean, we have the University of Virginia, we have Piedmont Virginia Community College, we have people in the community that have done this work, that have done some excellent jobs. So you know, that's one of the things that we did, is connected with our local experts.
Yeah. I'll also say, having Kevin's consultant help us with the process was really important. So we took our strategic plan, and then we took the framework, and we worked with Kevin's consultant over 6 months. We did bi-weekly meetings with a subgroup of our DEI committee, and we worked hard. Like, we went at it. It wasn't necessarily easy, but we really went through every aspect of the strategic plan and looked at, like, how can we build in equity with that consultant. So I want to add that it can be daunting. And I think, you know, having a consultant, if you're doing this, using this framework, is helpful, having that guide.
I think it's important first to acknowledge why the work is important. As a person personally, and as an organization, why is it important for you all to commit to the work? For us as an organization, for a school system, for the city of Charlottesville, wherever you are, why is it important to commit to the work? Reflect on that, and then acknowledge that the work is not going to be easy, but it will be worth it. And you always have to go back to your why. And this is a process. So there'll be moments when you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There are a lot of hard conversations and honest conversations that have to come from creating this framework and moving towards equity and in general. And so I think that if I could offer any advice, is just to get started. Mm-hmm. Take a small piece, as Robbie was saying, and work on that and do it well, and really focus on committing to equity and having the outcomes that you all decide are important for you.
And just being prepared for the hard conversations, because there's going to be some hard conversations. You can't have a staff that's mainly white, and then you're trying to integrate in, you know, more diversity, and just expect that it's all just going to be like super easy. Like, that's not how it works. Like, real conversations have to be had. Honesty, trust has to be created. We coupled this with a lot of leadership training. We looked at, it's a platform called the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, but you really look at like trust in a team and communication styles and patterns. But like, we looked at all of that, because I think you said it, Denise, like, you can plant the seed, but it's not going to take root and flower and be successful if it's not being planted in a garden that's ready to receive it. That's like my metaphor. It's really important. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Yeah, and I do think that also strength comes in numbers, right? So to Debbie's point, one of the things when we got started is Ravi actually convened people who she knew had some level of investment in diversity, equity, inclusion, that were rooting a lot of their work in equity, and said, hey, what say you about this? Maybe we can all kind of work on this together. And even when I started having conversations with Denise, the fact that there were others already engaged in the work felt that there were other people whose brains could be picked, around this. So there could be a collective group that's interested in just grappling with how to embed this work in their organization. And it could be the inclusive excellence framework, could be some other framework. But the point is that you're also going on the journey together, even if you're at different starting points. And I think there's value with that, which leads to another question that Grassfield Farms R&D put into the chat, which I think is tangentially connected. How can someone get proactive in their own communities with this work, right? A lot, again, for me, it was born out of a level of crisis and a desire to move forward in a way that was much more collaborative than siloed, but ultimately wanting to turn trials into triumphs, and realizing that, again, we were stronger together than we were trying to do this work alone and apart. So let me just offer that again, that question to the panelists. How can someone get proactive in their own communities with regard to DEI and, I assume, kind of framework work?
I'll just say we were hosting the community table, small groups, to prepare for these conversations on cultural differences in the community. And this all started after August 2017. And I can remember being new and sitting around a table here in the office, and we had Black church leaders in the room. I mean, we had such diversity, and there was a lot of frustrations. Like, I wasn't even prepared to try to navigate these conversations. I had not done enough work myself. I had an open heart. I wanted to do the right thing. I knew change was critical. I knew the United Way had this incredible platform that if we were to use it well and right, we could really be a part of what that change looked like. And certainly did not have that reputation. And I have certainly heard more than once, well, you're a white leader. What right do you have to even be in this space? What right do you have to even talk about any of this? Like, you don't have lived experience. What are you even doing here, right? And so I would go home like exhausted. Like, it was tough. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's never a right time to be uncomfortable. There's never a right time to be that leader that's going to lead with courage and not fear, but you kind of just have to jump in and do the work. And so being in those rooms and hearing those hard things about, hey, there's been systems of racism in Charlottesville for many, many decades, in fact, always. Great that you all white people want to do something about it now, but hey, like, we have been dealing with this forever. Like, those are the hard conversations that you're having, to be honest, to be frank about it. And so I'll say the first couple of years were really tough, but you just stick with it. It's the right thing to do. And we need all leaders, white leaders, Black leaders, Latino leaders. We need all leaders to prioritize this work and basically say, like, we can't have change if we don't all jump on and do this, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
Great. Anyone else? I will also just reference, since she was referenced in some of the remarks, Tara Warney Griggs is the consultant that was referenced. I will put her, I'm sure she would be fine with me putting her email in the chat for you. Let me just tell you, I hired her from Institutional Research, and she's also a community activist. And she started this work in the Columbia community to support organizations that desire to create inclusive excellence framework. And she found it so compelling that she actually left her full-time work to just become a consultant to help organizations. So she's a wonderful person, incredibly engaged with this work. The other thing that I would tell you, to talk about how communities can come together, in Columbia, Missouri, the community actually, to support inclusive excellence, came together. Just community partners came together and created a passport program. I'll put their latest passport in the chat so you can click on. They created these experiences that and gave out these passports to community members. And if you went and engaged in different DEI kind of experiences, you would get a stamp on your passport. They created these community circles. The mayor proclaimed August 21st, Inclusive Excellence Day. So you're only limited by your own creativity. A community can come together and really be transformative. They had over 1,000 people join this passport journey. That was beyond the framework. They took the framework and said, and upped it up a notch. So to your point and question, Grassfield Farms, you really can be as creative and innovative in this space as you want to. And it really starts with community partners just coming together and say, we want to be better and do better in this moment. Who wants to join that effort? Mm-hmm. Let me ask another question. Let's see. So how do we provide supportive leadership to kind of help move forward across, communities, across states, across our nation? Like, how do we ultimately generate additional support? I mean, it kind of builds off of Grassfield Farms question about the community getting involved. But how can you build and provide supportive leadership to kind of grow the effort?
I think it's important that we all learn from each other's experiences. The beauty of the Inclusive Excellence Framework is that it does allow for partnerships to come together and to have conversations about what's working for them. And we can take other people's experiences and lessons and incorporate it with ours. And so I think we can continue to reach out to others that are doing the work. And also, as you suggested, Tara is an amazing resource to our work as well.
I'll jump in and say, I think creating alliances is really important. So one of the things we've done is we have a partnership now with the Minority Business Alliance at the Chamber of Commerce, and we're, funding $80,000 some back into minority-owned businesses. But we're creating those partnerships where we know we can have an impact and make a difference. And we're talking about how the framework supports that work. Why are we prioritizing putting resources back into the community in that way? But I think those alliances are really important. And then actually having action behind those alliances so you can show change is, possible, and how that change is, going back in to support the community.
I think another thing too, and we've used this word community, I've heard it from everybody, is that really encouraging our leaders to get out into the community, to be a part of other organizations, to be on boards that are focused on diversity so that we can learn from them and we can also help support others within the community.
Wonderful. And here's an opportunity I would love for you, and quite honestly, if there are others in the chat, it sounds like there's just a high level of engagement and commitment to this work from those in attendance. I would love for our panelists just to talk a little bit about where you get your personal drive to do this work, right? You all have your own lived experiences. You've come to this space, both personally and professionally, for taking different routes. Where's your personal drive to doing this work? And actually, for those in attendance, if you want to put in your personal drive as well, feel free to in the chat. But I would love to for our panelists to share.
Well, I'll jump in quickly and just say, I helped raise my niece who's biracial. And I think when you firsthand experience the challenges of what it means to be Black in America, it changes the way you see yourself and the way you want to work to create some positive change. And I think for her, getting the calls about, I'm filling out a job application and the only box that suits me is other. Should I check other? Like, where do I fit in? And, seeing some of the racist behavior that she experienced at one of our local high schools. I mean, it's painful. And I think there's no way you can go through that, especially with something up close and personal with a loved one, and not, one, acknowledge the challenge, and two, acknowledge that you can take your platform, whatever that looks like, and you can do something substantive with it, and how critical that is. Because no person, right, should ever be made to feel less than. And like somehow they're not included for whatever reason, least amount the color of their skin. So yeah.
For me, I always said, oh, it's the right thing to do. And I thought, boy, that's trite. That's such a trite expression, because yes, of course it's the right thing to do. So I really tried to sit back and reflect on what has driven my passion. And my passion comes from the fact that, I moved around a lot as a young child. And one of the towns that I lived in was in a small town in North Carolina,
where I went to public school and I was actually the minority in the public school. So I had a little bit of a taste of what it feels like to be white. And in this case, it was white in a Black world. And there were two things that I learned from that. One was I totally learned to respect different cultures, enjoy the opportunities that are available to you to learn about different people and their history and all the things that make them who they are. And then I also learned about what it's like to not be liked or to um, be talked about or have adverse specs on myself. And in a very short period of time, it helped me open my mind to the fact that the world is a lot bigger than what I knew growing up. And I want it to be different. I want it to be different for my daughter, who's a teacher. I want it to be different for my grandson. I want to be a part of that. And this is the only way I can think of that right now that I can help do.
I think that inclusive excellence, the term itself is so telling for me. I think everyone deserves the right to be included, and everyone has the right to strive towards their definition of excellence. And so for me, I grew up in a low income area in Charlottesville. I'm a product of Charlottesville City Schools. But I was also invited into a world that was different than my home area. I was in a gifted program. And those were two totally different worlds. And I knew that by being in the gifted program, I had somehow been invited into a select group that had a different set of expectations than those students in my neighborhood and my peers in the neighborhood. But it was always bothersome for me. I knew that I was no less talented, or they were no less talented or gifted than I was, but somehow their life's course was determined by certain decisions that had been made for them. And so for me, that has always driven me to be an educator, to work towards equity, and to, in my own way, be able to right the wrongs that I saw in my own personal world.
That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. And I think we have at least time for a couple more questions, but one question that is connected to some of the previous offerings around kind of how you get started is how can a framework be scaled for large or smaller organizations? So just thinking about some organizations could say the organizations that you represent in their minds might be larger than the organizations that they're a part of. So if you gave advice on how to potentially scale this, depending on the organizational size, what advice might you give?
Well, we talked a little bit about this earlier, so I don't want to say the same thing over again. But I do think that I want to reiterate that the framework is flexible enough that you can have a 3-person small business all the way up to 1,000+ employees. So it's not, the framework is meant to be flexible based on the goals of your organization, the mission of your organization. And honestly, the capacity and resources. I want to mention that again. It does, to do this work requires resources. And so I think it's looking at those issues. What amount of resources do you have? What kind of capacity do you have? What are the goals that you want to accomplish? And what's the overall vision, mission of your organization in terms of doing the work? But the framework itself is flexible enough to kind of ebb and flow based on those factors.
Awesome. Anything else? Denise? Okay. Oh, someone said, oh, you mean, I'm so bad at reading the chat comment and commenting. So let me just say the last question again. Just the notion of scalability, thoughts about scaling this for small organizations or large organizations, but you can at least let that marinate and see if you have anything that you might want to add into that. Last question, it might be just last word, right? There used to be I don't know if it was a podcast or a show that I would watch on cable called The Last Word. But the notion of what would you say as a last word that I think might be energizing for those in attendance, just in this DEI space, in this moment that we're in, what would you leave those in attendance with, framework or otherwise, to kind of feel compelled to move this work forward?
I think having a culturally diverse staff or organization creates such a vibrant way of doing business. And it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, you want the diversity of perspectives, racial diversity, age diversity, gender diversity, that you create a powerful team and capability of creating sustainable change when you have that kind of diversity. And so I would just encourage anybody who hasn't started this journey to please do so. And I think you'll see the benefits, whatever those benefits look like, if it's the return on investment of your for-profit, or if you're able to deliver more services that are more client focused, that are centered on the individuals that benefit from your services. Whatever that looks like, it will only be improved by having a diverse organization.
I think the fact that you, all the people have joined today to listen to this and have an interest in this shows that there are many out there now that are seeing the work that's being done and are interested in being able to move it forward. And I thank you for joining us today and listening to us, and always invite someone to give me a call if they have a question. It's a senior living community. If you have another senior living community, you want to know what to do in that particular area, I'm always happy to be able to share what we are doing.
I would just encourage everyone to get started. We all have a role to play in this. We all have an ownership in making our world better. And so I think my parting words would be similar to Debbie's. If there's anything I can do to support your work, please reach out. I believe Dr. Mcdonald will be giving all of our contact information, but please reach out to me if there's anything I can do to help.
Yeah, I think I love the fact that you all represent different organizational types. When I have these conversations, for example, Debbie, and I mentioned Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge as this retirement community that has felt compelled to get involved in this work, I get raised eyebrows like, okay, really? Like, if Westminster is involved, we gotta get involved. So I think the involvement of every organization serves as a model for not just the communities that you're situated in, but also those that are grappling with getting started in this space. So for all of you, I just want to thank you for just trusting the process, trusting the path, even as daunting as it may appear, getting in where you felt you could fit in, and just taking the leap to get started. And quite honestly, just having a collaborative spirit to do this work. And I would say for those left in attendance, I think that's what it takes. It just takes that level of determination, of collaboration, of willingness, a willing heart to just get started. And you'll find that partners, even unlikely partners, will come along in this path and process and journey. And that's where you build momentum to kind of turn these ripples into waves. With that, I want to thank everyone in attendance. I want to thank Ben for the opportunity to participate in the TomTom virtual experience. Thank our panelists, who are amazing leaders, have grown to be just great friends in this work. And thank all of those in attendance for taking time to be with us today. I'll turn it back over to you, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Kevin, and panelists for joining us today. I think we will share those slides for folks who are interested in any follow-ups or learning more to the audience members. So encourage you to take a look at that and then join us for the rest of the series. We're following up on these conversations in a couple hours with the Equity Center's wraparound services partnership that was pioneered during the pandemic times. So yeah, just appreciate everyone's support and encouragement and advice here. So take care and
Thanks for having us. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.